What happens when Hollywood royalty meets late-night television and royal protocol collides with unfiltered honesty? In just 43 seconds, a single comment would transform a routine celebrity interview into the most explosive television moment of the year, leaving one A-list guest storming off set and a beloved host defending everything he stands for. The bright studio lights cast their familiar glow across the plush red couch as Andy Cohen settled into his host chair, that signature, mischievous smile playing across his lips. Tonight's guest was supposed to be television gold, a ratings magnet that would have viewers glued to their screens. Meghan Markle, former actress turned duchess, turned media mogul, had agreed to appear on Watch What Happens Live for what her publicist promised would be a candid, intimate conversation about her latest ventures. Andy shuffled through his blue cards, each one containing carefully crafted questions designed to elicit those memorable sound bites that would trend on social media for days. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, phones ready to capture every moment of what they expected to be another classic Cohen interview, filled with playful banter and surprising revelations. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle," Andy announced with his trademark enthusiasm, rising to greet his guest as she glided onto the set. She wore an elegant cream-colored blazer that caught the studio lights perfectly, her smile radiant as she waved to the cheering audience. Everything seemed picture-perfect as she took her place on the iconic couch, crossing her legs gracefully and adjusting her posture with practiced precision. "Meghan, welcome to the clubhouse," Andy said warmly, settling back into his chair. "We are so excited to have you here tonight. I have to say, you look absolutely stunning." "Thank you, Andy," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that polished tone that had become her signature in recent years. "I'm thrilled to be here. I've been watching your show for years, and I've always admired how you create such an intimate space for real conversations." Andy beamed at the compliment, clearly pleased with how smoothly the interview was starting. "Well, we certainly try to keep things real here. Speaking of real, let's dive right in. You've been incredibly busy lately with your various projects. Tell us about what's keeping you occupied these days." Meghan's eyes lit up as she launched into what sounded like a well-rehearsed pitch. "Oh, Andy, I'm so passionate about the work we're doing. We're really focused on amplifying voices that haven't been heard, creating content that matters, that makes a difference. It's not just about entertainment for us, it's about impact, about changing the conversation." "That's wonderful," Andy responded, though his expression suggested he was hoping for something a bit more specific. "Can you give us some concrete examples of these projects? Our viewers love hearing about the actual work behind the mission statements." A slight pause flickered across Meghan's face. Barely perceptible, but there nonetheless. "Well, we have several initiatives in development that I can't really discuss in detail yet, but I can tell you that everything we do is deeply intentional. We're not interested in creating content just for the sake of it. Every decision we make is carefully considered through the lens of social responsibility." Andy nodded politely, though seasoned viewers could detect the subtle shift in his demeanor. He was used to guests who gave vague answers, but something about Meghan's responses felt particularly rehearsed, as if she was delivering a presentation rather than having a conversation. "That sounds incredible," he said, glancing down at his next card. "Now, I have to ask, because our audience is dying to know, how do you balance your public advocacy work with your private family life? That must be such a delicate balance to strike." Meghan straightened slightly, her smile becoming more controlled. "Andy, I think what people don't realize is that for us, there is no separation between our public work and our private values. Everything we do is an extension of who we are as people, as parents, as global citizens. We don't compartmentalize our lives the way some people might." The subtle implication in her answer wasn't lost on Andy, who had built his career on understanding the nuances of celebrity communication. "That's really admirable," he said carefully, "though I imagine it must be challenging sometimes, especially when you're trying to maintain some privacy for your children." "Privacy is something we value deeply," Meghan replied, her tone becoming slightly more pointed. "Unfortunately, not everyone in the media respects those boundaries. Some people seem to think that public figures, particularly women of color, are fair game for any kind of invasion or commentary." Andy felt the temperature in the room shift slightly. This wasn't unusual for his show. Guests often used his platform to address media criticism, but something about Meghan's delivery felt more accusatory than usual. "I can definitely understand that frustration," he said diplomatically. "The media landscape has certainly changed a lot, especially with social media, giving everyone a voice." "Exactly," Meghan said, leaning forward slightly. "And some voices use their platforms responsibly, while others seem to prioritize gossip and speculation over actual journalism. It's really about understanding the responsibility that comes with having influence. The audience was hanging on every word now, sensing that this conversation was taking on a more serious tone than the typical lighthearted celebrity chat they were used to seeing on the show. Andy was walking a delicate line, trying to keep the interview engaging while navigating what seemed to be increasingly pointed comments. Speaking of influence, Andy said, attempting to steer the conversation towards safer ground, "You've certainly used your platform to shine a light on important causes. What would you say has been the most rewarding aspect of that advocacy work?" Meghan's expression softened slightly, and for a moment it seemed like the interview might return to more comfortable territory. "The most rewarding part is connecting with people who feel seen and heard, perhaps for the first time. When someone reaches out to say that something we've shared or supported has made a difference in their life, that's when you know you're doing the work that matters." "That must be incredibly fulfilling," Andy agreed, genuinely moved by her response. "And I imagine it makes the more challenging aspects of public life worth it." "It does," Meghan nodded. "Though I have to say, Andy, it would be nice if more people in positions of influence understood that impact. Instead of using their platforms to perpetuate harmful narratives or give voice to people who spread negativity." Andy's smile faltered slightly as he processed what felt like another veiled criticism. He had been in this business long enough to recognize when a guest was building towards something, and the pattern of Meghan's responses was becoming increasingly clear. Still, he maintained his professional composure, determined to keep the interview on track. "Well, I think most people in media are trying to do their best," he said carefully, "though I'm sure we all have room for improvement. Speaking of your media work, can you tell us more about your upcoming projects? I know our viewers would love to hear about what's next for you and Harry." Meghan's posture stiffened at the mention of specific projects. "Andy, I think what's important to understand is that we approach everything we do from a place of authenticity. We're not interested in creating content just because there's a market for it, or because it might be commercially successful. Everything has to align with our values." "Of course," Andy replied, though his patience was beginning to wear thin. "But can you give us any specifics about what those projects might look like? Are we talking about documentaries, scripted content, podcasts?" "We have various things in development," Meghan said with a wave of her hand. "But honestly, Andy, I'm more interested in talking about the bigger picture. The media landscape is so saturated with content that doesn't serve people, content that's designed to distract rather than elevate. We want to be part of the solution." The audience was beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. What had started as anticipation for juicy details about upcoming projects was turning into something that felt more like a lecture. Andy could sense the energy in the room changing and knew he needed to find a way to inject some levity into the conversation. "Well, I have to say, you're certainly passionate about making meaningful content," he said with a slight chuckle. "Though I hope there's still room in your schedule for some fun projects too. Our viewers love to see celebrities letting their hair down a bit." Meghan's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Fun is important, Andy, but I think we have a responsibility to think about what kind of fun we're promoting. Not all entertainment is created equal. Some of it actually perpetuates harmful stereotypes or gives platforms to people who don't deserve them." Andy felt his jaw tighten. After years of hosting countless celebrities, politicians, and public figures, he had developed a finely tuned sense for when someone was taking shots at him or his show. "I like to think we create a space where people can be themselves," he said, his voice carrying a slight edge. "Sometimes that means having difficult conversations. Sometimes it means keeping things light. It's all about balance." "Balance is crucial," Meghan agreed, though her tone suggested she didn't think Andy had achieved it. "But when you have a platform like yours, Andy, you have to ask yourself what kind of balance you're actually creating. Are you balancing important voices with trivial gossip? Are you balancing meaningful conversations with sensationalism?" The studio had grown noticeably quieter. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that this interview was heading into uncharted territory. Andy's producer was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, clearly concerned about where this conversation was heading. "I think our viewers appreciate the variety," Andy said, his voice remaining steady despite the growing tension. "Some nights we have serious political discussions. Other nights we play games and have fun. That's what makes television interesting." "Interesting for whom, though?" Meghan pressed. "Is it interesting for the people whose lives are turned into entertainment? Is it interesting for the communities who are marginalized while you're having fun with celebrities who perpetuate harmful narratives?" Andy set down his blue cards and looked directly at his guest. "Meghan, I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at here. Are you suggesting that having entertainment on television is somehow harmful?" I'm suggesting that entertainment without consciousness is harmful, she replied, her voice rising slightly. When you give platforms to people who spread negativity, when you treat serious issues like gossip, when you prioritize ratings over responsibility, yes, that can be harmful. And who decides what's responsible? Andy asked, his own voice gaining intensity. Who gets to determine which voices deserve platforms and which don't? Because that sounds like a pretty subjective judgment to me. Meghan leaned back slightly, as if she hadn't expected Andy to push back. I think it's pretty clear when someone is using their influence to tear others down rather than build them up. It's about basic human decency, Andy. Basic human decency? Andy repeated slowly. That's interesting, because I've always believed that basic human decency includes treating your host with respect when you agree to appear on their show. The audience drew a collective breath. This was the moment that seasoned Andy Cohen viewers had been waiting for, the point where their beloved host stopped playing nice and started speaking his truth. Meghan's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting such a direct response. I'm being perfectly respectful, she said, though her voice carried a defensive edge. I'm simply trying to have a meaningful conversation about media responsibility. Are you? Andy asked, tilting his head slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're spending our entire interview criticizing the very platform you chose to appear on. If you have such issues with entertainment television, I'm curious why you decided to come here tonight. Meghan's carefully composed facade began to crack. I came here because I thought you might be interested in having a real conversation instead of the usual superficial celebrity chat. But clearly, I was mistaken about your willingness to engage with serious topics. Serious topics, Andy repeated, a slight laugh escaping. Meghan, in the 15 minutes we've been talking, you haven't answered a single specific question about your actual work. Every response has been a vague statement about values and responsibility, usually accompanied by what feels like criticism of everyone else in the industry. That's not true, Meghan protested, though her voice lacked conviction. I've been very clear about our approach to content creation and our commitment to meaningful work. Your commitment to meaningful work, Andy said, nodding. Right. But what is that work exactly? Because our viewers tuned in tonight hoping to learn something concrete about what you're actually doing, not to hear a dissertation about how everyone else is doing it wrong. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Meghan's publicist was visibly squirming in the green room, while Andy's producer was making increasingly frantic hand signals from behind the cameras. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly becoming the most uncomfortable interview in the show's history. I think the problem, Andy, Meghan said, her voice taking on a colder tone, is that you're more interested in creating drama than in actually listening to what I'm trying to tell you. Drama? Andy's eyebrows shot up. Meghan, I asked you about your upcoming projects. That's literally the most basic question a host can ask a guest. How is that creating drama? It's your tone, she replied, though even she seemed to realize how weak that sounded. And your unwillingness to engage with the deeper conversation I'm trying to have about media responsibility. Andy leaned forward, his expression serious. Let me be very clear about something. I've been hosting this show for over a decade. I've interviewed thousands of guests, from A-list celebrities, to politicians, to activists, to ordinary people with extraordinary stories. And in all that time, I've never had someone sit on this couch and spend the entire interview telling me how I should be doing my job better. Meghan's face flushed slightly as Andy's words hit their mark. She shifted uncomfortably on the couch, clearly realizing that her approach had backfired spectacularly. I wasn't telling you how to do your job, Andy. I was simply trying to have a conversation about the broader impact of media choices. Were you? Andy asked, his voice calm but pointed. Because it sure sounded like you were suggesting that I give platforms to people who don't deserve them, and that I prioritize ratings over responsibility. If that's not telling me how to do my job, I'm not sure what island. The audience was completely silent now, every person in the studio hanging on each word of this unprecedented exchange. Andy's longtime viewers had seen him handle difficult guests before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad night or struggling with personal issues. This was someone who had come on his show specifically to lecture him about his own profession. That's not what I meant, Meghan said, though her voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier in the interview. I was speaking generally about the industry, not about you specifically. Generally about the industry, Andy repeated, nodding slowly. While sitting on my show, talking to me about my platform, that's an interesting distinction to make. Meghan straightened her blazer, a nervous gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone watching. I think you're misinterpreting my comments, Andy. I came here tonight to have a genuine conversation about important issues, and instead, you seem determined to turn this into some kind of confrontation. Andy's expression hardened. Meghan, let me ask you something. Do you think I'm stupid? The bluntness of the question clearly caught her off guard. Excuse me? Do you think I'm stupid? Andy repeated. Because the way you've been talking tonight suggests that you think I don't understand what you're really saying. That I can't recognize when someone is taking shots at me while pretending to have a philosophical discussion about media responsibility. Meghan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time all evening, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Andy, I never said or implied that you were stupid. I respect your intelligence, which is exactly why I thought you might be open to having a more substantive conversation. A more substantive conversation? Andy said, his voice dripping with incredulity. About what exactly? Because so far, the only substance I've heard is criticism wrapped in corporate speak about values and authenticity. That's not fair, Meghan protested, her composure finally beginning to crack in earnest. I've been trying to discuss important issues, and you're reducing everything to personal attacks. Andy leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. It wasn't a kind smile. Personal attacks? Meghan, you've spent the last 20 minutes implying that I'm irresponsible, that I give platforms to people who don't deserve them, that I prioritize entertainment over human decency, and when I point out what you're doing, suddenly I'm making personal attacks? I never said any of those things about you specifically, Meghan insisted, though even she seemed to realize how hollow that defense sounded. Right, Andy said. You just said them while sitting on my show, talking about my industry, on my platform, but they weren't about me specifically. Got it. The audience was beginning to murmur among themselves, clearly sensing that this interview was spiraling completely out of control. Andy's producer was now openly panicking, making slashing motions across his throat to suggest they should cut to commercial. But Andy wasn't finished. You know what I find really interesting, Meghan? He continued. You talk a lot about authenticity and meaningful conversations, but you haven't been authentic for 1 second since you sat down. Every answer has been a carefully crafted non-answer, designed to make you sound thoughtful while actually saying nothing at all. Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. How dare you question my authenticity? You don't know anything about me or what I've been through. What you've been through? Andy's voice rose slightly. Meghan, you're sitting in one of the most prestigious interview slots on television, promoting projects you won't even describe, while lecturing the host about how he should be more responsible. What exactly have you been through here tonight that's so difficult? You're being deliberately obtuse, Meghan snapped, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. I came here in good faith to have a real conversation, and instead you're treating me like some kind of carnival act. Andy's eyebrows shot up. A carnival act? Is that what you think my show is? Because if that's how you feel about it, I'm wondering why you agreed to come here in the first place. I thought you might be different, Meghan said, her voice becoming increasingly shrill. I thought you might actually be interested in having meaningful dialogue instead of just trying to get sound bites for social media. Meaningful dialogue, Andy repeated for what felt like the 10th time that evening. Meghan, I have tried repeatedly to have meaningful dialogue with you. I've asked about your projects, your advocacy work, your family life, your future plans, and every single time, you've given me nothing but vague platitudes and criticism. Meghan stood up abruptly, her face red with anger and embarrassment. I don't have to sit here and be attacked like this. This is exactly the kind of toxic environment that I was talking about. Andy remained seated, his voice calm but firm. Nobody's attacking you, Meghan. I'm simply pointing out that you came on my show and spent the entire time criticizing everything about it while refusing to engage with any of my actual questions. Your questions were superficial and designed to trap me. Meghan shot back, her voice now carrying a tone of outraged indignation that seemed completely disproportionate to anything that had actually happened. Andy finally stood as well, matching her energy. Trap you? Meghan, I asked you about your upcoming projects. That's the most basic, softball question any celebrity guest could possibly expect. How is that a trap? Because you're trying to get me to reveal information that isn't ready to be shared yet, she said, though even as the words left her mouth, they sounded ridiculous. Or, Andy said, his patience finally exhausted, you don't actually have any specific projects to discuss, which would explain why you've spent our entire conversation talking about everything except the work you're supposedly here to promote. The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. Meghan's face went white, then red, then white again. How dare you, she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. How dare you question my work and my integrity? I'm not questioning your integrity, Andy replied evenly. I'm questioning why you came on a talk show if you didn't want to actually talk about anything specific." That was it. That was the moment that would be replayed on social media for months to come. Meghan grabbed her purse from beside the couch, her hands shaking with fury. "I don't have to listen to this. I don't have to be disrespected by someone who clearly has no understanding of what real work looks like." The studio erupted in shocked gasps and nervous laughter. Andy stood perfectly still, watching as his guest prepared to storm off his set in the middle of a live interview. "Meghan," he said quietly, "if you leave now, this is how people are going to remember this conversation." She turned back to face him, her eyes blazing. "Good. Let them remember that I wasn't willing to participate in your little circus. Let them remember that some people actually have standards." And with that, Meghan Markle walked off the set of Watch What Happens Live, leaving Andy Cohen standing alone on his stage, facing a studio full of stunned audience members and cameras that had captured every moment of the most explosive celebrity meltdown in late-night television history. Andy looked directly into the camera, his expression a mixture of bewilderment and professional composure. "Well," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "that just happened. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I think we need to process what we all just witnessed together." As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed for commercial break, Andy remained standing where Meghan had left him, shaking his head in disbelief at what had just transpired in his clubhouse.